Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
On a Tuesday night in November of 1966, two young couples went looking for something to do in a small town on the Ohio River and found a thing that more than 100 other people would spend the next year saying they had seen it too. Roger and Linda Scarberry, Steve and Mary Millette, they drove north at a Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to a stretch of woods the locals called the TNT area, an old wartime explosives plant gone back to forest. Near the road, by the ruins of a powerhouse, something was standing. Linda Scarberry tried to describe it for the police that same night, and she kept circling back to the eyes. Two big red discs, she said, like the reflectors on the back of a car, and once they caught you, you could not look away. The thing itself was shaped like a man, only bigger, 6.5, maybe 7 feet, with wings folded down against its back. Roger got the car turned around and put the speedometer past 100 on Route 62. It went up into the air after them. One thing stuck with Roger above all. It did not flap. It rose and it followed, and the wings barely moved, and they could not lose it until the lights of town came up. They drove straight to the courthouse. The deputy on duty, Millard Halstead, had known these kids most of their lives, and he took them seriously enough to drive back out to the TNT area himself. When they got there, Halstead swung his headlights across the dark, and the witnesses did not have to point him toward it. 2 red circles were already looking back at him, exactly where the couple said they would be. The next morning, the Point Pleasant Register ran the story under a headline that gives away how little anyone knew what to do with it. "Couples see man-sized bird," it read. "Creature. Something." The thing had no name. A copy editor somewhere down the newswire gave it one. Batman was the biggest show on television that year. The comics had a villain called Killer Moth, and so the editor typed the word Mothman, half as a joke. The witnesses themselves never used it. They had called it a bird or a creature. The joke is what stuck. The place it came out of is worth standing in for a moment. During the Second World War, this was the West Virginia Ordnance Works, 3,500 people turning out around 720,000 pounds of TNT a day. They stored it in dome-shaped concrete bunkers, dozens of them set deep in the trees so that one accident could not take the rest. When the war ended, they walked away from it. The forest came back over the bunkers and the rusting powerhouse, and the ground stayed poisoned with explosive residue long enough to land on a federal cleanup list decades later. If you wanted to build a haunted wood from scratch, you would build that one. And there is a small irony in what it is now. The TNT area today is a wildlife refuge, a place people drive to in order to watch birds. After the Scarberrys, it did not stop. The very next night, a young mother named Marcella Bennett was out at the TNT area with relatives. The thing rose up off the ground close to her, and she was so frightened that she dropped the baby in her arms before she snatched the child back and ran for the house. She did not sleep right for months. She said she felt watched for years afterward. A few days later, a woman named Connie Carpenter met it on the road home in daylight, and for days after, her eyes swelled and burned, as if she had looked into something she should not have. And it turned out the first sighting had not even been the first. 3 days before the Scarberrys, 5 men digging a grave up near Clendenin had watched a brown-winged figure lift out of the trees and pass over their heads. They only said so once the newspapers made it safe to. By the time it was over, the writer who would make this story famous counted more than 100 people across 13 months. They did not know each other. They described the same thing. That writer was John Keel, and he is the reason you have heard of any of this. He was a New York journalist of the old Fortean kind, a man who collected the things science had set aside, and he came down to Point Pleasant in December of 1966 and kept coming back. His book, The Mothman Prophecies, came out in 1975, and it did not argue for flying saucers. Keel thought the creature and the men in dark suits who turned up around town asking questions were the same thing wearing different masks. He called them ultraterrestrials, something older than us and not from any planet. Before him, a local writer named Gray Barker had already put the creature and what came after it into print in a 1970 book he called The Silver Bridge, and the person who lived inside the story the whole time was a reporter named Mary Heyer, who ran the Point Pleasant office of the Athens Messenger and wrote a column called Where the Waters Mingle. She took the sightings down as they came and fed them out to the wire, and she became the town's record of its own strange year. Keel dedicated his book to her. There was a stranger thread running alongside it. A couple of weeks before the first Mothman sighting, a Woodrow Derenberger told police and then told a television camera in Parkersburg that a craft shaped like a kerosene lamp chimney had set down on the highway in front of him. A smiling man stepped out, spoke to him without moving his mouth, and told him his name was Indrid Cold. Everything we can check about that comes down to this. A named man went on the record in November of 1966 and said it happened. Everything past that is his word and Keel's framing. The careful way to tell this story keeps those two apart. 13 months after the couples first ran from it, the story changed for good. On the 15th of December, 1967, around 5 in the evening, the Silver Bridge was full. It carried Route 35 across the Ohio River, and it was rush hour 2 weeks before Christmas. The deck packed bumper to bumper with people heading home and people going shopping. The bridge had opened in 1928. Chains of flat steel bars called eyebars held it up, pinned together like the links of a bicycle chain. Inside one of those bars, the one engineers would later number 330, a crack about 1/10 of an inch deep had been growing for 40 years on the inside of a pinhole where no one could ever have seen it. That afternoon, it finished growing. One bar split, its partner slipped off the pin, the chain let go, and the whole bridge went into the river in under a minute. 46 people died. 2 of them were never found. And the sightings stopped. That is the fact the whole legend is built on. The thing had been seen for 13 months, and then a bridge fell and killed 46 people 2 weeks before Christmas, and no one saw the red eyes in Point Pleasant again. Some people decided it had come to warn them. Others decided it had come to do it. The question of which has never closed, because the ending was so clean. We have been doing this for a long time. Roman officials read the flight of birds before any large public decision. Irish families heard a death coming in the cry of the banshee. So when a strange, winged thing appears and a disaster follows, the mind reaches for a line between them before anyone asks it to. The trouble is what people have built on that instinct since. There is an owl man reported in Cornwall 10 years later, glowing eyes and all, and it looks like a copy of Point Pleasant. Its reports all run back through one showman, Tony Doc Shields, who had a habit of blurring folklore and prank. There is a black bird of Chernobyl, supposedly seen before the reactor fire in 1986, and this one is worth being plain about. The earliest trace anyone can find of that story is from around 2005, nearly 20 years after the disaster, written up on the internet in the exact shape of the Mothman. People built it out of Point Pleasant and pinned it onto a catastrophe that was already history.
The skeptics had an answer within days. 4 days after the first sighting, a wildlife biologist at West Virginia University named Robert Smith told a reporter the likeliest culprit was a sandhill crane, a tall bird with a wingspan close to 7 feet and a patch of bare red skin on its head, blown far off its migration route into country where such a bird would look badly out of place. Later investigators added the barred owl, whose eyes throw back a hard red shine when a flashlight catches them. The folklorist David Clark, who studied the whole episode, put it another way. He said what happened at Point Pleasant was a town turning a real, ambiguous fright into a single creature with the help of a catchy name in one persuasive book, and then fastening a prophecy onto it after the fact. Because that is the quiet problem with the warning. Nobody said a bridge would fall. They only said so once it had. What is certain here is small and terrible. 46 people went into the Ohio River because a flaw the width of a fingernail had been growing inside a steel bar since before most of them were born, in a place no inspector of that era could have looked. The one clean good that came out of it is this: the country had never required anyone to inspect its bridges on a schedule, and after Point Pleasant, it did. The routine that keeps the bridge you drove over this morning standing was written in part because of this one. What is uncertain is everything around that. We do not know what 4 people saw at the edge of the TNT works on a Tuesday night, or why the same shape kept coming back to the same woods for 13 months, or why a town that lost 46 of its own would choose, in the end, to remember a winged thing instead of an eyebar. They raised a 12-foot steel statue of the creature on Main Street. They still gather under it every September. The bridge had a cause. The Mothman has a town. We can tell you which of those two we are able to measure. If you enjoyed this, the full entry on the Mothman is on the site at crazyalchemist.com, with the bibliography and the source documents listed for anyone who wants to follow the trail themselves. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts for more on the history of esotericism in the dark corners of belief. Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.